How's it going, y'all? This is McFrostyBoy. What am I saying? Just drop here. And today we're going to be talking about teamwork. So this focuses this segment particularly. We're going to be focusing on roles within teams. So I personally separate roles into two categories, like that I feel like are worthy of thinking about. The first category are functional roles, and so these are like literally directly related to your squad's ability to fulfill certain objectives within the game. The second category are social roles, and so these are basically how your squad converses, makes decisions, strategizes, and shares information. And I personally view the two to be separate. Okay. That just happened. And so the reason why I separate the two is because mechanically certain players may have preferences with their play style. But then in terms of their mentality and the way they think about the game and what the things that they think are important and are good at just intellectually, they may be two separate things. So I generally try to avoid placing limitations like that on myself or my teammates. When I talk about roles, I talk about responsibilities that people tend to feel, not necessarily hard and fast, you can't do this sort of stuff. I think these are just sort of, and the whole value out of thinking of roles is understanding sort of the things that you're typically looking for, so then you can start to tailor your play style, the things you practice with your aim, the weapons you select, the legend you select, all of those things to sort of feed that play style, or the other way around. To make sure that you're not playing legends that are, I guess, asynergistic with your desired playstyle. For example, you wouldn't really want to be someone who is running point a lot and pushing a lot as Caustic. It would be pretty unusual. Although there could be, some way of playing him that way that I don't know of, but in all likelihood, probably not going to be something that you're doing. I think that's the value in roles, not necessarily trying to fix stuff in place in the game. I think definitely remaining flexible and being able to adapt is more important and should be of greater priority. So you should definitely be objectively evaluating situations so that you are selecting from what you believe to be the most optimal options, as opposed to doing what you think your role is supposed to be fulfilling. So it's you should always be thinking critically about the game and evaluating and seeing if you have to breach with your current understanding of what should be or shouldn't be done. Do that. So I think that the most typical squad composition I have seen, and the most typical way I've seen squads behave in terms of just patterns I have observed, are there is a player who plays at the mid-range and does the bulk of the damage, and after landing big damage by either breaking armor and doing significant damage to flesh, they will rely on a different teammate who will actually push and apply pressure at closer ranges. And then the third and final teammate, their responsibility is just not to go down. And they're typically playing support and are playing a character like Lifeline or Gibraltar that has the ability to reverse losing situations and help get the team back on its feet. And I believe that is the general situation of roles that I feel I see the most frequently, is the most balanced, and provides squads with the most options. So let's go over these roles in a little more detail here.
Evo shield here. Level 2.
And sort of the things that they'll be looking for and things that you can expect in terms of loadout and general legend selection. So the mid-range, let's start with the mid-range character, since they're sort of the character that comes first in a given engagement. So mid-range characters, generally speaking, it's not a huge deal if they're playing particular legends. I think some legends you'll tend to see are Bloodhound. You may see utility characters sometimes filling that role. A little less common, I suppose. You may see someone like Crypto fulfilling that role. Crypto could also fulfill a support role. largely comes down to, I think, weapon selection. So mid-range type players are going to tend to prefer weapons like the R301, the Hemlock, potentially the Scout. Weapons that allow them to attach hopefully something like a 2x or a 3x and operate from greater range, giving them more reach so that they can break damage sooner. After breaking that damage and allowing their close range buddy to push and approach the enemy, they're going to lay down covering fire to attempt to pressure the other enemies before starting to move forward and support the push in an ideal scenario. Because Apex never ever deviates from the ideal scenario. Close range characters, or close range players, are going to tend to, I mean, I think honestly the character that's best for a close range role is going to be Wraith. She has the smallest hitbox, best animations, and her Q is very well suited to accomplishing the act of like probing positions and getting closer to enemies and applying more pressure. Basically checking for a squad if it's like safe to do something before like the squad actually commits to it. So in general, characters that have escape abilities like Wraith. Did I just see someone? No, I'm crazy. Like Wraith, Pathfinder, potentially Bangalore, are legends that are like going to be like well suited to fulfilling that role. Should definitely be carrying at very least one close range option. And I think it's better to carry also a mid-range option, but they could like run like double close range options, like an R301, or excuse me, not an R301, an R9 and a Volt combination, or you know, an SMG and some sort of like shotgun. So it's like something that you might see. I don't particularly advise that because I think it creates like inflexibility that is going to prevent you from fulfilling that role, and I don't really think you need two close range weapons to be effective at close range and to be able to fulfill that role effectively. And so, and then finally, like support characters, as I mentioned, are typically going to be played by characters like Gibraltar. They'll probably have loadouts that are more similar to mid-range loadouts, although both Gibraltar and Lifeline particularly benefit from having close range options, since they're often going to be placed in positions where they're forced to play either the Dome or their Revive Shield defensively in order to protect their team. So,
heads up, new kill leader.
Generally speaking,
Enemy spotted.
I feel like the support characters, maybe the mid-range characters, are characters you'll see. You might see sniper rifles on. I don't typically play with people who use sniper rifles, don't use them much myself, and I don't tend to strategize around them because they're kind of like a weird case that create like all sorts of like odd limitations on it, place odd limitations on a squad that like I don't really like having to think about or deal with. But yeah, so in general, you want to have an idea generally of like the things that you're trying to go for, without getting overly fixated and committed to playing a certain way because of position-related issues, right? Like you may be forced to play outside of your given role. For example, if you are engaging an enemy squad and for whatever reason you're forced to engage faster than you would like to, then sometimes the character that's closest may wind up having to take on the role of the early close range aggressor, which is why I think generally having balanced loadouts is more favorable than having like hyper specialized ones. So I feel like having weapons that perform well, always have like having at least a decent option at like all given ranges is preferable. So if you're gonna run a sniper rifle, I think also making sure that you have something like the R301 or maybe the Flatline that will give you effective options at the mid and close range. Will serve you well. And even if you are a player that likes to operate in that close range role, I still really think that you should be making a point to have a mid-range option. Because again, there are going to be situations where you just gotta do your own damage and create your own opening for you to be able to push. You can't rely on your teammates to be able to create that situation for you.
Heads up. The ring's moving.
And which is like sort of like where like a lot of like my focus and personal emphasis on like versatility comes in, because I just believe that Apex is going to create situations that are going to force you to deviate from known plans. So I guess like my general advice, like when it comes to roles, especially like when it comes to like functional roles, are to kind of like know the general archetype that you fall into, right? If you're falling into the close range, the support, or the mid-range role, and like generally like what those roles do, as well as to avoid getting overly fixated on your roles and allowing that to prevent you from making optimal decisions. And so that a situation may demand, or at least suggest, that you should deviate from your role because of position related issues, because of like the legends, because of resources, like whatever. There's just going to be things that make it better for you to deviate from the role that you feel you are best prepared to fill. And in those situations, you should just immediately do so. You shouldn't, I guess, put yourself in bad situations or leave certain responsibilities of the squad unattended for the sake of like a notion of like how you ought to be playing the game. If that makes sense. So that's it, and we'll talk about like social roles probably like at a later date.